This video is a strategic guide for when to take Social Security if you want to retire early and you've saved well for retirement. I'll walk you through a clean framework for making the best decision possible for you, not just based on blindly following traditional advice, but in a way that fits you and your unique retirement plan. Now, if you have saved over $2 million for retirement, the usual Social Security advice may look a little different. In fact, the traditional rules assume you're trying to wring every dollar from the system, but what if your real goal is something else entirely? Now, there are tons of articles and research papers by very credible people that argue for delaying your benefits to maximize your lifetime payout. Just to use a very simple example, say you can claim at 62 and get $1,000 a month, but waiting until 70, then your benefit jumps to $1,770 a month. That's a 77% boost. You know, if you run a simple break-even table and think, hey, if I just live past 84, the late claiming wins. Now, it's tempting to treat 70 as the obvious answer, but we're not done quite yet, because if we look at, for example, Sarah and Tim, they want to retire early, they want to retire at 60, but if they delay until 70, that's a decade of withdrawals with no Social Security. Now, what we're going to learn in today's video that taking Social Security isn't just about a paycheck, it's a planning lever, one that shapes your tax picture, longevity risk, portfolio pressure, Roth conversion windows. So again, when we run this through a break-even analysis, yes, delaying might look optimal on paper, but once we layer in those other variables, the better choice might surprise you. The best time to take Social Security is about flexibility, tax strategy, and risk control. So now that we know we need to get beyond just the break even, let's talk about the first decision matrix. Now, one of the biggest hidden risks in the claiming decision is the tension between dying early versus living a long time. The classic example of this risk is, imagine you choose to delay till 70, but are unexpectedly diagnosed with a chronic illness at 67 and then pass away at 68. That mismatch, the late claim and the short life, is a scenario that nobody wants to imagine, but when it happens, it feels tragic. You forfeited years of benefits and never got the upside. Now imagine the opposite. Someone claims at 62 and they live till age 95. That's not fun to model, but in real life, if you're age 95, you probably aren't feeling like you made a massive mistake. You're probably saying, this is just what my retirement looks like. You can see here that Tim and Sarah, if they are in the upper echelon of longevity and live to 96, they claim in their late 60s or delay it all the way, they will be within 98% of their lifetime maximum benefit. So someone thinking, I want to make sure I have guaranteed income in my late 80s, 90s, maybe you're more motivated by longevity risk. If I live a long time, I will regret not waiting. But that scenario is perceived more slowly and less dramatically. On the flip side, we all carry internal views about how long normal retirement life looks like. Those who lean conservatively may worry, what if I die too soon to make delaying worthwhile? That fear pushes a lot of people to claim earlier. The shorter our life, the more it is perfectly reasonable to take it early. This is where perception plays a massive role in making this decision. Now, psychologist Peter Sandman describes this risk as risk equals hazard plus outrage. The idea is that some outcomes, even if unlikely, feel far more painful because they trigger an emotional response. What we see is people overweight mortality risk. They're afraid of leaving behind benefits on the table, and that fear often nudges them to claim it sooner. Let's say Sarah and Tim plan to delay claiming until age 70 for a higher benefit, but Tim passed away at 68. That's again another painful what if. If Tim claims at 62 and lives at 95, it just feels like life. Less of a mistake and more of a quiet trade-off. This is why this is such a personal, unique decision. Nobody knows the expiration of their birth certificate, but mortality versus longevity risk is a core tension that you need to decide for yourself. But a core reason why I made this video, specifically for those that retire early, is that it's not just a Social Security problem, it's a retirement portfolio problem. When you delay your Social Security, your portfolio must cover withdrawals early on, and that introduces a new risk, a risk called sequence of returns risk. The classic example of this risk is, let's say we have two portfolios of $1 million saved, the first with a good sequence while withdrawing $50K a year, positive returns early on. The second one just flipped on its head, the opposite, bad earlier, good later. Now, starting with a bad sequence, same income level, same average return, but a completely different account balance. This is the heart of sequence returns risk, because the order of your returns matters, especially in retirement when you're now pulling money out. The question you might be asking is now, what's the difference if I claim early versus later, and what effect does that have on my portfolio? Because if we tie this back into the claiming strategy, if Sarah and Tim retire at 60 and delay claiming till 70, their portfolio again needs to carry the full load for 10 years, $120,000 per year. But claiming earlier, now they're going to get a less benefit, but Social Security is covering part of the spend. Even a partial offset, say 30,000 years, softens that draw, and that can make measurable differences depending on market conditions. So let me show you what I mean by that. Now, let's say we have the same withdrawal target using a 60-40 type portfolio, spending before the great financial crisis. But one of the scenarios, Sarah and Tim are claiming at 62, which is this blue line right here, and the other at 70, which is this mustard line right here. Now, we can see quite clearly that when they delay it, which is the blue colored line, and we look at the portfolio, for example, 2016, there's quite a significant difference in the portfolio balance. Now, you might be asking why, and that's because they weren't withdrawing heavily in a downturn. Now, this is a sequence of return effect. And what's also interesting here is if I flip this to retiring just right after the financial crisis, and we compare early versus late claiming, now I'm letting more of my money compound and participate in the upside of the recovery. So what we see here is that in bad sequence returns, lower withdrawals into a bad market allows the portfolio to recover faster, and also in good sequence of returns means lower withdrawals into good markets and allow us more participation. Now, I'm cherry picking this example because it's interesting, but the big caveat is that in scenarios where returns are strong or later in life, the delayed claim can actually catch up and even overtake. But that requires you to live a long life and have a strong return path. All this is to say that sequence of returns and the substitution risk can tilt the scales towards earlier claiming, especially in a vulnerable market window. Okay, and then here's another variable here, one that few people model, and that is what if this system itself changes? Now, we all assume that your benefits at age 70 or 67 are going to be guaranteed, but what if before then Congress cuts benefits, modifies claiming rules, or changes the formula? Now, your projected late claim might be much lower, and that's not far-fetched. Social Security has changed before, full retirement age, benefit formulas, taxability, cost of living adjustments, all have been tweaked over the past several decades. Now, the trust fund projections suggest that by 2033, without reform, benefits could be cut by 20%. Now, that doesn't mean we panic, but it does mean there is a risk to weigh here. Now, major structural changes typically have grandfathering or delayed implementation, but benefit cuts or tweaks could hit new claimers a little bit more heavily. Now, our government is obviously incentivized to keep voters happy and make sure that you're all getting your full Social Security benefit, but is a funding risk that planning goes beyond any sort of break even, that if you do delay too long, you do increase your exposure to potential downside changes in policy. Now, every year you wait is another year in which policy shift could potentially erode that benefit. Now, this isn't necessarily advice just to take it because of that, but it's something that you need to account for in your plan and your risk tolerance for any sort of adjustment. Now, if we look at the same simulation again for Tim and Sarah, when you layer in plausible cuts, for example, the cuts in 2033, the optimal claiming point shifts earlier. So I hope you're starting to understand why there's a lot more under the hood of an analysis like this, which can shift the optimal claiming window depending on your situation. Now, we covered 4 lenses: the math, the mortality, longevity part, the sequence, substitution, and policy risk. Now let's integrate them and see how they tilt the decision for real people. Now, if we overlay all 4, and I'm going to include the sheet that I made that was inspired by Income Lab to help you start to weigh the pros and cons and different decisions of claiming early versus claiming late. The break-even will often point to a later claiming for higher lifetime benefits, especially if you are going to live a longer life. Mortality risk pulls it a little bit towards the earlier claiming side. Having a bad sequence or substitution risk often favors earlier claiming, and then policy risk adds further downside pressure to delay. So where does that leave you? When you layer in all these risks, you can often find a land of what I call the close enough zone. For example, a claiming age that is within 1 to 2, maybe 3% of the max lifetime payout with less stress along the way. Now, for example, for Sarah and Tim, in many test cases, the close enough claiming ages were in the 65 to 68 range, where the balance of risk exposure balances longevity, portfolio risk. Even though on paper delaying it to 70 had the highest theoretical payout, the trade-off makes those intermediate options more compelling in a majority of realistic scenarios. Now, the optimal claiming strategy for you is rarely a one-size-fits-all. It's a decision point best chosen by layering in math, risk, preferences, portfolio stress tests, policy sensitivity, basically whatever is going to give you the best retirement possible. In real life, adds even more layers that we weren't even able to touch on in this entire video. Taxes matter. If your income is high earlier, Social Security might push you into higher tax brackets. We got spousal, survivor, divorce implications that shift optimal timing, your risk tolerance for family history, how much you want a portfolio to buffer towards the end of your life versus earlier on. But again, if you take one thing away from this video, is that when you factor in mortality, return sequence, portfolio substitution, policy uncertainty, there are very reasonable arguments for claiming earlier, at least not insisting on maximal delay. That said, there are still situations where delaying makes sense, especially when your income is low early, your taxation is favorable later, or you're confident in market returns in your health. But now that you've seen that waiting till 70 isn't always the smartest move for even high net worth retirees, what if you want to walk away even earlier than age 60, like Sarah and Tim, like maybe retiring before 55? How much damage does that do to your Social Security benefits? So watch this video next to uncover how early retirement does affect your benefits for Social Security and how to avoid hidden penalties and what strategies you can do to keep your plan on track. Once again, this is Matt Calcagno, Certified Financial Planner here at One Degree Advisors. If you'd like to talk to me or someone on my team about your plan to retire early, click the link in the description below. We'd love to talk with you.